Hey guys, Abel here once again, and just like about 2 weeks ago, this time once again we have a bit of a special episode because I've had the pleasure to be on someone else's podcast once again, and that is the Breaking Muscle podcast, where I've been interviewed by this awesome gentleman called Tom. I would rather not butcher his last name, but he has been asking a lot of good questions from me about how I got into training, body fat percentages, ratios of bulking to cutting, the biggest keystone habits for staying lean and maintaining a good, healthy lifestyle for the long term. And I think it can be very valuable to many of you who want to make fitness, staying lean, building muscle a part of your life and not let it take over your life completely. In other words, maximizing your results in the gym and in the kitchen while not turning into an obsessive person and not jeopardizing your productivity in other areas of life. So I think this was a really cool interview. I want to give a quick plug to the Breaking Muscle podcast, and I'm going to be linking their resources in the show description below. Feel free to check out the timestamps. And if you enjoy this episode, then I would really appreciate if you could leave a 5-star rating on iTunes on the Sustainable Self-Development Podcast. And that's pretty much all I have to say about this intro. Thank you for Tom once again for interviewing me, and I hope you guys enjoy this talk. So with that, let's get into the show.
Hey Abel, so as I just said in that introduction, really excited to have you on board today to discuss things and maybe looking at not so much what's optimal, but what's sustainable and where that grey area is and how guys can get the most, not necessarily from the least, but from the most that matches with their desire to put effort into getting themselves in great shape. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got involved in the whole fitness industry, were you a sporty kid growing up that this all came naturally to, a little bit of your backstory for anyone that doesn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So pleasure to be here, first of all. As for what my background is, I think it's sort of a typical story in that I got into fitness as a way of trying to fix myself in a way. I just wasn't happy with a lot of things in my life at the time, which is kind of normal, I guess, for anybody in their early 20s. That's just a confusing and annoying period.
Yes.
Social pressure, what's going to happen with your career, and just a lot of weird things that are culminating in your life. And fitness and working out and controlling my nutrition felt like the one stable thing in my life that I could really nail down. And I got really passionate about it. Very soon I became overly obsessive about it, actually. And that was sort of a thing that I almost needed, I think, at that time, because by really pouring myself into my fitness pursuits, I could just forget about other areas of my life that were kind of lagging behind. And then over time, once that initial thrill of that obsession kind of wore off, where it was no longer as exciting to, oh, cool, so I could hit my numbers again today, and I still have abs, and I hit a new PR in the gym. That was really exciting for a while. After some point, it was no longer as exciting. However, I started to experience some of the negative implications of all that obsession, and that showed itself up on my eating behaviors. So I started to develop some really funky, weird behaviors around food. It started impacting my social life. I started avoiding people just so that I could control my nutrition better. My workouts were no longer as enjoyable, and they just became more of a means of, burning calories, making room for my post-workout meal. And it became basically a barrier in my life, or something that was just holding me back from other stuff that I would have wanted to do. And I started kind of fighting my way through that. That was a very painful and long process, a lot of lessons learned and a lot of weird and hard battles fought in that process. But that really made me more passionate about fitness than anything else before that. All the little successes I had, or the first time I saw my abs, or the first time I could hit, 2 plates per side on the bench press, all those things were just trumped by those epiphanies that I gained when I started to create a more sustainable way for myself in fitness. And that made me really passionate about it. And that made me want to get into the industry, initially just as an interviewer. I was just recording podcasts with some of the smartest people out there, like Eric Helms. I remember the first time I interviewed him, that was one of the best experiences I had in my entire life up until that point. So I started doing that. And eventually I said, you know what, like, I'm so much into it anyway. Let's just try to make this, a side hustle, kind of a career path for myself in a way. And And, a couple of years later, I'm still in the fitness industry, I guess. So that's my backstory.
Yeah. Well, so for anyone that doesn't realize, the sort of back catalogue of interviews you've done is a kind of a who's who of fitness, certainly evidence-based, like that whole crowd. You've pretty much covered everyone, maybe multiple times, which is definitely worth checking out the episodes there. Some excellent interviews. And I think it's really interesting that you first touched on that whole, I want to fix myself, because I know from my personal experience, a lot of the guys I work with, they're sort of skinny guys who lack in self-confidence. They're unhappy, and the gym offers them that route to what they perceive as exactly what they want and the happiness. But then there's those stumbling blocks and, those rites of passage almost you have to go through where it seems like you have to go a little bit crazy with your food, and suddenly you actually, with this pursuit that should be adding to your life, it ends up controlling your life, and you start worrying about your macros or when you're eating certain meals, or saving up all your calories for crazy blowouts and all this sort of thing. So it sounds very familiar to me. I've been on some similar things, and lots of guys I've worked with have been through those. So I think it's good to hear actually, so people can recognize that when you're hearing people on podcasts, they're not all these robots that just have everything sussed from the get-go and it all comes easy. There's a journey that you have to go through to learn these things. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
Now, just sort of looking back, would you describe yourself, you were someone who was actually, quite skinny and wanted to gain weight, as opposed to, I had JC Dean on, and he was someone who had also always been kind of like the chubby kid. And then now his great epiphany was he found he could get himself in shape and it didn't have to control his life. Were you kind of the opposite end of that spectrum? Yeah,
that's an interesting question, actually. I wouldn't say I belong particularly to the skinny or the fat crowd. I remember having a lot of insecurities when I was a little kid about being too chubby, and I was almost idolizing the skinny kids in my class. And it's really funny because now looking back on those pictures, I see myself and I see a healthy, perfectly good shape, just a really beautiful, glowing kid. And I see all these skeletons that I remember having a lot of insecurities about that. Later on, as I got into my teens, I started getting into sports, and then I had more of just a normal athletic look. I was never the jacked kid in my class or anything like that. I wasn't that one weird kid with abs or anything like that. But I wouldn't say that I was chubby by that point. Interestingly, the first time I really got actually chubby was when I was already into fitness. Once I was trying to control my food too much, and eventually I broke down and went on a couple of binges. And one day I looked up and it's like, holy shit, I'm actually fatter than I was ever before I got into fitness in the first place. So that was sort of an interesting learning experience. But if I had to nail down one thing that I was insecure about before anything else, that was more so just trying to be leaner, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you mentioned the first time you saw your abs. I know from personal experience and working with clients, it's kind of like this landmark moment for people where they may not have ever been fat, but they've never seen their abs. And when they suddenly see them, they look for any excuse to have their shirt off, first of all, it seems. Just in the weirdest situations, as suddenly they need to be wiping their brow with their t-shirt or taking their shirt off. But it boosts just that little thing of having low enough body fat to see your abs suddenly seems to transform them, boost their confidence. They walk a little taller, they're a bit more self-assured. So it's amazing how powerful small changes in our physique can actually be to our whole life. And so when you sort of started to get a handle on things and were seeing results, did you find that really had that positive effect on your life?
Yeah, it's really funny because just yesterday I was talking about this with someone who is actually a competitive bodybuilder, and we both kind of agreed on the fact that getting in shape and changing your body composition, it has this really weird slope, sort of non-linear slope in terms of how that impacts other areas of your life, such as your self-confidence and just how you value yourself. I think if you are someone who is struggling with self-confidence issues, maybe you compare yourself with other people and you feel like you just don't quite belong, then changing your physique and getting into better shape initially is one of the easiest ways in which you can turn everything into a more positive direction. And you will probably find yourself being more self-disciplined. You learn about structure. You learn about things that maybe you didn't think you could control before. Now you know you can. And it definitely gives you some self-confidence just because of the fact that you look better. Now, once you got from, let's say, on a 1 to 10 scale or 0 to 10 scale, you go from a 2 out of 10 up to a 7 out of 10, which is not that hard. Like most guys get there in the first, 1 or 2 years of their training for sure. That is going to have a really huge effect. And I definitely noticed that on myself. Like I just, for Christ's sakes, it helped me through some borderline depressive periods, just that process. Now, once you're already at a 7 out of 10, and then you're really, really working hard to get to an 8 out of 10, and then eventually a 9, and then a 10 out of 10, that process, it's not nearly as cut and clear that is going to have a positive impact on other areas of your life. Like I found it for myself for sure. You've been in this game for a long time. Maybe you have noticed this at some points as well, that you can get so fixated on fitness and just trying to optimize everything that it can flat out make you less successful in other areas. Yes. Like it's not so much the case anymore that, I'm so disciplined with my diet or with my training and it carries over to my business and into my relationships. It can make you less social. It can make you more slack on your work and things like that because you're just like so invested into it. And, if anything, a contest diet or something like that can definitely do that. But I think it also applies if someone is just always trying to gain weight like crazy and just bulk up. I talked to a guy who said that he was gaining mass like crazy. He was always a skinny kid. And he didn't go out to socialize at night because he was afraid that he might expend too much energy and his surplus might get smaller. So no matter what your goals are, it can get to the point where there is just that huge amount of, just severely diminishing returns. So yeah, it's an interesting way how that tends to work. I don't know if you have the same experience.
Yeah, 100%. And you're right. The whole point is this should add to your life, not rule your life. And then, as you say, I think it's a good example you have. Putting some numbers on it, almost hitting that 7 out of 10 threshold can definitely be a very positive experience for everyone. But then finding those marginal gains from then on, for every, in a previous podcast, Valentin Tambosi said, for every yes, there's a no. And you kind of end up making those decisions because you're so obsessed and you don't realize what you're saying no to. So usually until it's got a bit drastic and a bit too late. And then you kind of realize how silly potentially you've been. And I know that I went through that. There were all sorts of social instances where I was kind of doing weird things to mean that I could be there, but I wasn't really there. For example, going to watch an international rugby match with my friends, and then I took a little Tupperware with nuts and a protein shake to watch this game with guys I'd known since I was at school. They're all having beers, but I'm stood in a pub, sneaking some walnuts or something out of a Tupperware and sipping on a protein shake. And it's about those times that you sort of have a realization that hang on a minute, maybe this isn't really having the positive effects I thought it was.
Yeah, I think where us content producers tend to run into problems sometimes, or where we get it wrong, is that we forget that what those yeses and nos are for us is it's not going to be the same case for those that are potentially following our content. So for Valentin, for example, he's a bodybuilder, he's a coach, he has a lot of clients, he's a content producer for those people. So for him, saying no to potentially a social event or maybe deprioritizing some other really important things in order to improve his physique is actually going to directly benefit his business. In a way, that's almost like work. Not really, but I'm sort of working towards some other thing besides just fitness that is meaningful to me. But those answers are going to be very different for me, especially for Valentin, than for the guy that might be following us who just, wants to live a better life and have his physique improvement just being a part of that.
Yes. Yeah, 100% correct. Very recently I had a couple of photo shoots to get some content for my website, my Instagram page, and anyone who follows me on Instagram knows I can't move for those pictures now. Apologies, guys. But yeah, it's the same thing. I realized that my motivation there, I've got a date booked in with a photographer, first of all, so I don't want to look like, out of condition in front of them, but I need these images for my business, which is a bit different to the guy I'm training who's going on holiday to Mykonos with his girlfriend, who kind of wants to look like he lifts on the beach, but he's not so invested in it. There's not the same priority placed on it. And therefore, knowing the habits that I'll have in place and those no's that I'm comfortable making will be different for him. I think it's a brilliant point you make. And so we've kind of skirted around the subject of how we almost all seem to give ourselves some kind of borderline food disorder or eating disorder as we investigate this and then explore our fitness journey further. And for most people, they come out of that the other side better off. Some people don't. So in my experience, finding ways to set habits that are positive and sustainable is crucial when I'm working with clients. So can you give us some examples of, particular habits either you use or have you found effective for other people to set themselves up for success, so they're not trading their life for hitting a super clean diet or whatever?
Yeah. So dieting or eating in general is something that I think it's very important to adopt habits or systems that you can rely on autopilot, basically. And you have to invest as little mental power or mental energy into that as possible. Because nutrition and your diet is something that is there with you 3-4 times a day, 7 days a week. And it's going to be like that for the rest of your life. So if you get that wrong too early, that can really it can mess with people's relationship with food for years to come at any given time. So I emphasize that a lot, to give people simple systems and also kind of just a mindset of how to integrate all of that into their lives. So a couple of things that I like to recommend when I'm working together with someone, I give them a document and there's a lot of guidelines in there, but two that is always in there is a couple of keystone habits. And one of them is the baseline plate of food, as I like to call it. So each plate of food, whenever it is or whatever the circumstances, should have a high quality protein source, which could be whatever. It could be eggs or a steak or fatty fish, or if you're vegetarian, whatever, something else. Then it should have a carbohydrate / a fiber source. And then it should have or could have, depending on what your goals are, whether you're gaining muscle or dieting, some discretionary calories, some additional carb or fat source. And if you just think about putting together a meal like that, for example, it just makes decision making so much easier. And then you can avoid putting together these completely insane combinations of foods that don't even make any sense. You actually think about a plate of food like your grandmother used to tell you.
Yes.
And then other than that, a baseline selection of foods, or like a core backbone of your diet, a list of foods that you're kind of just loosely holding in your mind. You know that they're always there, and those are the foods that you're generally going to eat every day. And you're flexibly rotating through them, but no major shifts. The changes should be things like, instead of tomatoes, today I will eat cucumbers or something like that. Instead of a fatty steak, I will eat fatty fish, something like that. If someone just follows these two rules, and then there are other things that we can talk about, like mindfulness, for example, but if they just follow these rules, it just makes the whole process just so much more easy, less mentally taxing, and then I think we would see a lot less of these message board craziness stuff that we see on Facebook and on Instagram, people posting their diet and asking for feedback whether they're doing things wrong or right. It's simple. You can follow it. And that is how most people tend to eat, who remain actually in great shape, not just for a couple of months, but for years to come. So I think it's all about adopting simple habits and simple systems, putting the whole thing on autopilot, and then just making small modifications as you go. So that's sort of the baseline template that I tend to work with. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. I think that illustrates the point very nicely. And actually, it brought to mind, are you familiar with precision nutrition?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I remember thinking it was brilliant. You've got like a fist-sized portion of protein, then like a palm of carbs or whatever, and like a thumb-sized portion of fat. Now, it doesn't mean that people need to measure out and work out how big their spoon is compared to their thumb or whatever, but they have their hands with them. It means they can eyeball things. And once they know that, as you say, a plate of food should look like a plate of food, there should be a protein source, some vegetables, et cetera, et cetera. It means that they've got so much more flexibility and they can be more relaxed. If the people I work with are often having to go out for dinner at restaurants to entertain clients, they can make choices and their plate can, it aligns with their goals, what they're eating, as opposed to before they'd be stressing about, someone told me I had to do like 0 carb or this and this, and then all these little details. They don't have the filter to see where they fit into the big picture. And having that just basic, like you say, keystone habits is a phenomenal one. And another key element, I think, from there you mentioned was that whole being on autopilot. So you're minimizing the decisions you make, because I find that decision fatigue is a real problem for people. Yeah. And in my experience, people don't really cheat at breakfast, but they're like go off the deep end come the evening when they've had to answer 300 emails, be in a 4-hour meeting at work, stress about all these tiny little details, and they're just exhausted by the end of the day. And they can't be logical about and rational with their food choice. So having this set up on autopilot, I'm sure it's not completely foolproof, but it sets them up for success. So I think it's a really smart way to go about things.
Yeah. And also I think it's important to clarify that, I think there is value in going through their first body transformations for people initially. Mm-hmm. So I think it is good to experience, bulking up, getting up to a nice, strong level where maybe your body fat levels are a bit higher than what you would want, but actually pushing the calories, experiencing how that feels, then experiencing a cut as well. Going just having that experience so that you even have a reference point. Because initially, probably people won't even necessarily appreciate the value of putting things on autopilot because they are just excited about being super hardcore and doing things the most optimal way they can. So if I'm going to be working together with someone who is a novice and is just looking to, even work up to like a bodyweight squat or bench press or something, I'm going to be like, okay, you know what? Let's hit these numbers and let's get you strong and let's get you some good early results. And then later on, as they gain some self-efficacy, some confidence in their ability, and also some general skills like calorie awareness, which can be very important, then over time moving them into these more sustainable approach. And that's why, by the way, I don't know what your experience is on this, but that's why these days I'm not really a big fan of working together with people for 4 weeks only at a time, because then it kind of just forces your hand into trying to get them quick results, but actually like having a good 3 or so months, because then initially you can go through these big transformations and then later on teach them the more sustainable way.
Yes.
Like something that they can apply in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're working with someone for just 4 weeks, the only real way you can make a noticeable visual differences to them is put them in an extreme calorie deficit. And set them up for a massive rebound. So yes, I think you're spot on there, and I really take your point about there's value in them going through these experiences so they can learn how they feel, but also the benefits of being on autopilot. Much the same way, tracking macros for a period of time, I think, can be a really valuable teaching tool for someone to then go to a more intuitive style of eating down the road. But they need that level of understanding and knowledge that they can get from tracking macros that then informs their ability to be a little bit more flexible and relax with things later down
Absolutely.
the line. Which is, again, actually something I think people miss. Some people that talk about how you should be eating intuitively. Well, that's great if you're essentially an expert on training and nutrition and you know how to do that. But if you ask one of my clients when they first come in to eat intuitively, they're going to have a croissant and donuts with a few coffees and then a few beers. I mean, it's not going to work out well. So you kind of need that level, and you need to go through these processes. So I think that's an excellent point. So we've got like that keystone habit of that, how a plate should look. Are there any other nutritional or diet based habits that you like to put in place for people?
The one pet peeve of mine is mindful eating. And this is something that, by mindfulness, I basically just mean eating in a non-distracted way. So not having your phone around, not watching TV or being in front of your laptop. That is something that is a very hard sell oftentimes. And this is something that I sometimes abandon as well. It's like my first meal of the day typically is always very mindful, or I wouldn't even say very mindful. I simply just don't have anything that would distract me from eating. I just scarf it down and then move on. And then sometimes in my post-workout meal or during my dinner, I will catch up on my YouTube subscriptions on my phone or something like that. And anytime I'm doing that, I'm always surprised by how much more likely I am to just a little bit overstuff myself, not going on a binge or anything like that. I'm luckily past that, but just eat to the point where I get a little bit bloated. I feel a little bit gross. That's the first thing that I get surprised by. The second thing is how difficult it is once I get into the habit of doing that to abandon it and go back to a more mindful way of eating. It's always surprising to me. And that kind of explains why it's such a hard sell. And what I see with other people, it can almost be like a withdrawal process from a drug or something like that. It can be really behaviorally addictive to eat in a distracted state and do other things. And it has its appeal. It's kind of fun, like listening to a good podcast or watching some cool video while you're eating. It's a lot of fun for sure. I will be the first one to admit it. But there is just something magical about experiencing food and being more in tune with how your body is getting more satiated with each and every bite. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a meditative process, but simply focusing on the act of eating, it gives a much deeper satisfaction from that meal. It's hard to give a good analogy, but it would be something like popping up a caffeine pill and going to the gym, like you will feel the caffeine, you will feel it kicking in eventually. And that's one sort of way of enjoying caffeine versus sitting down with a cup of coffee and journaling or something like that on a Sunday morning. I don't know if you've done that, but it's a lot of fun. Like sipping on a cup of coffee and writing down your thoughts. It can be a borderline euphoric feeling. It's sort of like that between mindful eating and non-mindful eating. So that's sort of the very gimmicky pitch for that, but it actually has a lot of research behind it. Like people, when they are distracted, they tend to eat more. Some studies even show some pretty crazy numbers, like 42% more or something. In social situations, people also tend to eat more. And it also just makes you much less aware of your body's signals. You don't quite notice the point where really I had enough. I'm very satisfied at this point, but I kind of just keep eating because there is still some time left from my TV show or from this podcast that I'm listening to. So that is sort of like a hack. Like even if someone is really knowledgeable in terms of nutrition, that can make the difference between being able to maintain, 12% body fat year round as opposed to 15 or 10% instead of 12. It can actually make a big difference. And right now, for example, that I'm cutting, for the initial couple of weeks, I didn't use this because whatever, it was just fun to watch videos while I was eating. And now I re-implemented it into my life. And man, it was almost like a diet pill or some fat burning supplement or something like that. It just made the whole process so much easier. And the good news is if you're doing that while gaining muscle or while bulking, for example, you don't necessarily have to diet in order to enjoy the benefits. The meals are a lot of fun. Like when you're eating calorie dense, tasty foods during a gaining phase, for example, eating mindfully, I mean, your meals are going to be a ton of fun that way. So I would consider that to be a really big keystone habit as well that I tend to recommend.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. It's as you were describing it, I was thinking of different situations. It's something that I struggle with as well. I mean, people that are only too aware of this, it shows how tempting looking at your phone is when you're eating, because we fall into that trap ourselves, yet we know the benefits of not doing it. And like you said, breakfast, not really a problem, but if I've trained a couple of people and I've got a meal to have, I find I'm on Instagram checking my messages, replying to people or whatever. These little things that somehow I've convinced myself it's vital I do at that moment. And when I'm dieting, so like for this photo shoot, all of a sudden calories were harder to come by. There wasn't the abundance of them. And all of a sudden I was way more mindful about that meal. I'd turn my phone over, put it away, sit down, because I knew I wasn't getting much more food that day or whatever compared to normal, compared to being at the top of a bulk. And without really it being a conscious decision, or really having put much thought into it, I suddenly became more mindful. And then I wasn't as hungry as you would expect to be when you're on a calorie deficit, because I was taking more time to eat the food and being aware of what I was doing. So I didn't really suffer with hunger despite being in a deficit. Whereas I think if I'd eaten at the normal rate, I'd have either not been able to get myself in that deficit, or I'd have been constantly hungry because I'd have just inhaled the food and not let it had a time to digest. So there's two little practical tips that I try and put into practice myself when I'm trying to be good at this, but also tell clients is, number one is when you're eating in a social setting, say you're out with people at a restaurant, try and be the last one to finish your meal. It just tends to get you to be in that thing of slowing down and enjoying it. And the other one, I can't remember where I picked this up, but they used to call it the 5, 10, 15, protocol or something. And it was when your plate is put in front of you, you just wait 5 seconds rather than immediately diving in. Just give yourself that 5 seconds to sort of chill and look at what you're about to enjoy. In between, or after you take a mouthful, you put your knife and fork down for 10 seconds, and then you chew each mouthful for 15 chews. And that takes some real discipline at first, because it basically feels like you're eating in slow motion. But if you're trying to get full without having a huge calorie meal, for example, if you're trying to in a cut, I found it a really, really powerful way to finish a meal and actually feel quite satisfied. So yeah, those are just two quick practical things that I found quite helpful.
It's interesting. All those strategies are under the same umbrella of basically just making you more aware of what you're doing. Because like if you think about it, it's the brain that is regulating your hunger and satiety mechanisms. It's not just your stomach being filled up with food. So a lot of these strategies like mindfulness or eating speed, or even there is research showing that when you eat from smaller plates, you tend to get more satiated compared to eating from larger plates. And if you think about it, it's the same mechanism. The food is on a smaller plate, so it appears to be bigger. You have to be more aware of what you're putting into your mouth. So awareness and just slowing down a little bit and finding time to actually noticing what's happening in this crazy world where everything is happening so fast and there are so many distractions. I think that's kind of what's encompassing the whole thing here. So
yeah, you're right. Yeah, there's like the plate size thing, even cutlery size can have an impact on that. And doing this, can help, as I've alluded to, keep you in a calorie deficit when needed. But also, I found anecdotally, it seems to really improve digestion. So people that used to complain about gas or bloating, and they're asking me, should they take digestive enzymes and stuff like this? What can they do to improve digestion? And it's like, well, have you tried just slowing down and actually chewing your food? And then when they do, lo and behold, that those things tend to settle down. Okay, so there's a couple of good habits to sort of anchor your diet and set yourself up for success. And then we talked a bit about people seeing their abs for the first time, other people bulking up and getting a bit too fat, perhaps, and going through that process. So, what are some? Well, we're going to go with percentage body fats, but then we maybe get a discussion which we have with Menno about how potentially skewed people's views are on those, but. Do you feel there's some ranges that, number one, for feeling great day to day and just having a high quality of life, are a good rule of thumb to be in? And then also, if you're looking to gain muscle, is there an upper limit that you would suggest that is best to cap things at?
Yeah, so it's how sustainable a given body fat percentage is for one person versus another is going to be somewhat individual. Like I actually know some people who can legitimately maintain like 7% body fat all the time and they feel just fine. Like they don't report any of the negative things that other people do when they are that lean. Other people, the majority of people, once they are at like 12% body fat or so, the returns are starting to diminish as they are getting fatter in terms of increased well-being. Like they don't necessarily have more energy or more libido or lower hunger levels when they go from 12% to 13%, and then it just diminishes more and more. And then eventually probably you reach a point where it starts to backslide a little bit. So that is going to be somewhat individual. Now, I think when people are thinking about what body fat percentage is sustainable for them, they tend to focus a little bit too much on the outcome and just what they see would look good or what is appealing just visually. And they don't think about what it actually takes to maintain that body fat percentage. And I actually had a video not long ago, which I was hoping it would go viral because it was one of the most important videos I've ever done, but it was moderately positively received. And it was called Your Ideal Body Fat Percentage Calculated. And basically I put together a calculator which gave you the lowest body fat percentage that you can realistically expect to maintain given the lifestyle trade-offs that you're willing to make. So it asks you questions like, how strict are you willing to be with your day-to-day nutrition? Like, do you want to just eat whatever you want? Or are you willing to eat like a reasonably healthy diet like an adult person should? Or are you willing to eat not just a healthy diet, but fundamentally a lower calorie diet with lower calorie foods? Are you willing to track your macros or follow a strict meal plan? And then, similar questions about social events, how you manage your circadian rhythms, things like that. And based on that, it gave you kind of a score. And for most people, the result that they got was around 12% body fat. And that really mirrors my experience as well. That is a body fat percentage which I can sort of hover around year round and just basically eat like an adult person with some responsibility and with some good habits, have some calorie awareness, of course. And needless to say, I'm also resistance training and I'm not completely sedentary. So that will be a really good value for a lot of people. Now, for some people, that might be 15% body fat, and for some select few, it might be 8%. It kind of varies, but I think people should be thinking about what they are willing to take on and what is the kind of lifestyle that they actually want to live. It's similar to, instead of thinking about, okay, I want to have this job, I want to become an investment banker because that pays a lot of money. Instead of think about like, how would I want a typical day in my life to look like? Like, do I want to have 14-hour days and sit in an office and have a ton of money to spend, but I don't actually have the time to even do anything with that money because I'm working all the time? If not, then, maybe don't just think about money, but think about the lifestyle implications. So that's what's a good body fat percentage to maintain side of the question. I don't know if that answers it, and then we can get into the upper limit of body fat as well.
Yeah, I think that was excellent. And I think there's a couple of key points. The first one is, of course, that yes, what the best body fat is specific to you, because as you say, some people natural propensity to be able to get away and feel great on low body fats, whereas being at that body fat would feel like death to other people. And then I suppose the other thing is that people always measure their body fat visually by their abs, and then understanding that actually some guys store more or less body fat there. So you might actually have quite a low body fat, but your abs may not be really, really clear, or you may actually have higher body fat than you believe, but you actually can see your abs. So it's basically that the abs aren't the only indicator of body fat, which is a little aside, but
some hard experiences about that. Like it's always bad to be the negative exception to the rule. Like most people, if they want to have awesome abs, typically the answer is just get leaner. And I when I first saw my abs, actually, I'm 6 foot, a hair over 6 foot. And the first time I saw my abs, I got down to 75 kilos. I was dieting myself into the ground, and I still only saw my abs if the lighting was good and I was flexing. And then I was like, what the hell? Like, how lean? Like, do I have to go down to 60 kilos? What's going to happen here? And then I sent my pictures to a couple of reputable experts, and they were like, dude, you're like 8% body fat already. Like, I'm sorry, but if you don't see your abs that well, you just have shit ab genetics. So it just varies.
Yes. Yeah. But actually, abs are something that seems to fascinate people. The amount of questions generated based on, maybe it's biased because when I get lean, my abs show up reasonably well. So I suppose again, there's my bias there. But I don't invest much time in ab training yet. Based on the questions I get from people, you'd think it was one of the most important things they could possibly do.
Yeah.
And actually, on a slightly different thing with that though, again, is I feel like I had a reasonably good sporting background as a youngster, and then there was a period of time when I was probably 16 or 17 where I'd do like hundreds of crunches each day. So now where I don't do any ab training or very little for a long time, I haven't. My maintenance volume for abs is quite low, but probably those few years of doing outrageous quantities contributed to the fact that they're now there when I get lean, which I think Jared Feather has discussed, I think, as well.
Yeah.
Talking about, which I think is another interesting element. So for people to realize, we've got a bit of a tangent about abs there, but I think it's important for people to realize. Okay, so now, if you can tell us your thoughts about higher body fat percentages as you're bulking up, and is there an upper limit there?
Yeah, so higher body fat percentages, or I think in a way affect people to a similar degree to how low body fat percentages affect them to a different degree. So for some people, like there just comes a clear point where their well-being just actually starts going down. Like there is a nice uptick to a point as they start gaining weight. I'm similar in that regard. Like as I go from 9% to 10% to 11, 12, 13, 14, it's just like, man, I just feel better and better. Energy levels are better. Sex drive is better. I sleep better. Hunger and satiety mechanisms are amazingly well functioning. And then it comes a point where I just start feel lethargic, sluggish. My work capacity in the gym starts going down. Taking the stairs starts becoming like a real hassle. So there just comes a clear point where probably at this point, at the very least, I'm not benefiting from getting even higher in body fat than what I'm currently. And as I start cutting at that point, I actually start feeling better and better for the first couple of weeks. So probably that is a very good indication of what's a good sweet spot for myself, at least. And I think most people can find that through trial and error. Now, I think in general, for a lot of people, that upper limit starts coming probably under 20% body fat. I know that the 15% body fat mark is often touted as that cutoff point. It's based on no clear evidence, certainly. I think it's only important to mention because in recent years, and it started to change in this past 1 or 2 years maybe, but it has been touted by a lot of reputable experts and people that just the community looked up to in general as, okay, 15% body fat. At that point, insulin sensitivity goes to hell. Your systemic inflammation levels are going to go through the roof. You won't be putting on muscle very efficiently, and every extra calorie is just going to go into fat gain. Like, I think as a general rule of thumb, that 15% mark is not a bad advice to give people to not go over. If anything, because of tracking issues, like if you go from 13% body fat to 14 and then to 15, you can still see some changes in your body fat levels. Like, okay, I probably just got fatter. When you go from 16 to 17%, the changes are barely noticeable. So I think it can have some practical advantages, not to mention if someone is a bodybuilder who wants to compete with some regularity, or maybe a fitness model, or just someone like you, who wants to take a couple of pictures, every once in a while to post it on Instagram and just to show people that you're walking the walk, then there are some practical downsides to getting too high in body fat. But I don't think that it has for the general population has been that beneficial, that excessive fear mongering about 15% body fat is the upper limit of body fat that you should carry at any one time. Because I think it reinforced a lot of the perma dieting and chronic dieting tendencies that a lot of people tend to have anyway. I mean, this, like someone starts bulking, they just finish the cut really successfully. And, at the end of a cut, they are a bit hungry. They are enthusiastic that they can finally start their gaining phase. And maybe they get a bit overzealous about reintroducing new foods. Maybe their food choices now are too palatable, too low in volume compared to how they were dieting, and they cannot control themselves. They gain a little bit too much body fat for the first couple of weeks. And instead of taking 4 months to go from 10% body fat to 13%, they do it in a month or 2 weeks. That sucks and that's bad. But now I think the best advice for them would be, okay, you know what? Damage is done. Just take it slow from now on and just gain. And don't worry too much about how fast you're going to reach 15% body fat. If you go up to 18% body fat, not a huge issue. And I think with that mindset, a lot more people would actually complete successful gaining phases, and they wouldn't cut it short because of the fear of reaching this evil 15% body fat mark too fast.
Yes.
So yeah, that would be my input on that.
Yeah, 100%. I think the amount of people I've seen say they get down to like single digit for the first time, but then they're back up, when they, as you say, they eat some food, they've been probably over restrictive, they enjoy a little bit of food, and they're almost overnight, they're back at 12%. Well, now they've only got 3% of wiggle room to gain before they, in theory, need to cut again, which they can't generate any momentum and build any sort of muscle building momentum there. So yes, I think that's a really valuable point. And then of course the fact that, actually how many guys in the gym are actually genuinely below 15% body fat anyway is, in my experience, not that many. People seem to be, underestimating their body fat by quite some margin.
Oh, absolutely.
And of course, as you say, the research is just not there to back that 15% threshold. I forget whose paper it was, but fairly recently they were showing there was no sort of anabolic resistance as your body fat increased up higher to the 20 and beyond percentage. But then again, it may well come down to psychologically, how do you feel in yourself? Because of course, this is, again, we've touched on, it's all supposed to be adding value to you. If you feel horrible in your own skin, then even if you maybe are gaining a little bit more muscle, that's not a trade-off worth making. So everything is relative to the individual. And I think, again, going through these experiences yourself is a hugely valuable thing. And gives you that kind of that mindfulness of knowing, well, when I start to feel like this, as my weight approaches this number or my body fat goes up there, and I'm just not functioning. Whereas I think a lot of people almost go through life in, as far as their physique and mental well-being, is almost like in a zombie state. They're not taking that biofeedback. They don't recognize when they feel like crap. It's just maybe they always feel like crap, perhaps is the reason. But having that skill of understanding those different sensations and feelings and energy levels that you have is vital, and in terms of it being your own coach as well, and making smart choices. Yeah,
it's really funny because I've been over 90 kilos in my life once. That was like several years ago when I hit a bit of a rough patch and then I binged myself up. Other than that, I've never been over 90 kilos. I'm not an overly big boned person. I've always been kind of lighter, even as a kid. I've never been like a particularly heavy kid. Even when I was fatter, I wasn't that heavy. And, I'm not a teenager anymore, but I have to admit, it got into my head that, man, I'm 6 foot, never been over 90 kilos, so 200 pounds. Like, am I a real man even? Like, what the hell? And I decided, you know what? Like, during this bulk, no matter what, but I'm going to finish over 90 kilos. Like, I'm going to go up there, and maybe this is what my body actually needs to finally hold on to some more muscle mass. Maybe I need to force feed myself a bit beyond the point where I would normally cut off my bulking phase, and then I will retain some more muscle at the end of it. I went up there, still looked not lean, but, with really kind lighting conditions and with a lot of flexing, I could still see some ab definition. So, okay, not terrible. Then I started cutting down, and I cut down to about 12% body fat, I would say. And I made the evaluation that, well, let's just see here. I gained about 9 kilograms of weight during this bulking phase and about 1 kilogram of muscle, if I look at the weight difference. So, of course, as you get more advanced, you will gain a less favorable proportion of lean mass to fat mass. That is inevitable. But an 8-to-1 ratio, that is just a little bit hard to justify. So, but I had to experience it on my own skin. And sure as hell, I will not do that again.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I remember after the first time I got really, really lean, targeting the weight I wanted to get to at the next bulk before I started my diet again. And I didn't ever make it, but it was just too ambitious. But also, if I had made it, I don't think I'd have trumped your 8-to-1 ratio. I'd have probably been having to do a 10-to-1 ratio or something to be able to get to that weight, which is not a trade-off worth making. But again, you have to. I sort of worked out about 80% of the way there. This isn't happening, but you have to go through that process, which is the whole thing is about enjoying the process, learning the lessons, and evolving as you go. Which I think is, it's part of the thing that I enjoy. It's been so fascinating for me is being able to do that. Mm. Now, we're at the point where you're, sustaining things. So back in the day, maybe you were training loads, really strict with your diet. What does your training and nutrition look like for you now? How often are you in the gym? How closely are you monitoring what you eat? Are you tracking macros, et cetera, et cetera?
Okay, so my training is fairly hardcore. I have to say, this is not necessarily going to be the answer that people will expect based on my talks about sustainability. But I will be honest, I just really like training. It gives structure to my day. And it is a time where I can listen to a podcast or something. I unwind. I can enjoy the introvert that I am, or enjoy being the introvert that I am. So that is a fun time for me. So I'm in the gym 7 days a week. Yeah. I have been brought up I've been educated by Menno that you've had on recently on your podcast. And I completed his personal trainer certification course. For a long time, I was skeptical about full body or high frequency training. I thought that was a recipe for disaster in terms of your connective tissue. And so I was always trying to limit myself to train a muscle group at most like 3 days a week. These days, I train full body every day, basically. Calves are the only thing that I don't train every day. And that is mainly because my calves are kind of more genetically gifted, you could say.
Oh, that hurts. Imagine being calf genetically gifted. I'm looking at mine. I can barely see them. So,
yeah, well, I would much rather take small calves and have good abs. So,
grass is always greener.
No, absolutely. Yeah, but calves are the only thing. And also biceps, actually. I don't do arm isolation every day. But other than that, I chest, back, quads, hamstrings, I do train them every day. I should motivate myself to train abs as well, but they're just, maybe you can give some advice for me on that, because it's just, once I get decently strong on weighted ab exercises, it's just a pain in the ass to keep loading them and they start feeling weird. But anyway, so I train fairly hardcore, and that is a big shift compared to what I was doing before. And the reason behind that mainly is that if I had to, I'm not too worried. I used to be very much along the lines of don't get too obsessive about training, take it more easily, look at sustainability. But on the other hand, training is fun. It is just a sport activity that you do for a certain amount of time every day or every other day or 2 days a week or whatever. You are at a specific location when you do it. And then when you leave that location, that activity is over and then you can move on with your life. And worst case scenario, if you burn yourself out on it or if you really overdo it, worst case scenario, I mean, of course, you could get injured. But if you train for muscle growth, it's fairly rare. And let's assume that that doesn't happen. So worst case scenario, you will just get burnt out on it and you take a week off or maybe a couple of weeks off or God forbid, a couple of months off. That sucks, of course. You will lose some muscle, but in the grand scheme of things, you can just return to training again and then you can continue where you left off. You will regain the muscle and gain some more. And looking back after a couple of years, it will just not matter nearly as much as you thought it would. Now with diet, you cannot leave that behind. Like you cannot quit eating, right? I mean, if you get burnt out on eating and dieting, then people don't fast for a couple of weeks. They don't stop eating. They will usually go on a binge or they let go of their good eating habits, which is then followed by even more restriction, which can mess with someone's relationship with food. So when it comes to training, I'm not that worried about getting burnt out or overdoing things. Now, I will say that I could probably get similar results or maybe even as good results if I trained 4 days a week, maybe even 3 days a week with dedicated use of my time and being smart with programming. I could do that, but I just enjoy that hour or so that I spend there every day. The gym is close to my place, so I just go there and full body. Volume is moderately high, around 20 sets for most muscle groups per week. And I have 3 or 4 movements for every muscle group that I'm just rotating through, different intensities that I'm using to manage connective tissue injuries or prevent them from happening. And I'm just really enjoying that at the moment. And so that's about training. Do you have any follow-up on that? Or
yeah, well, I think, first of all, brilliant. Thanks for honesty. Is training 7 days a week. I think the thing is that if you're talking about sustainable, if you enjoy something, it's sustainable. So the fact is that for you, being in the gym is enjoyable and therefore it's not a problem. It's not taking away from your life. Now, I suppose someone listening might have to make that trade-off. If getting in the gym is a bit of an undertaking to them, they're probably not listening to this podcast. But if it is, then maybe they can manage their sustainability by its frequency is the variable that's at play for them, that they maybe only go 3 times a week. Yeah, whereas for you, if I told you could only be in the gym 3 times a week, it would probably take away from your life potentially, and actually you wouldn't be so enjoyed and fulfilled. So that understanding yourself and where your priorities lay and your what you enjoy doing is vital for that too. And I really love the quote of diet, you can't leave that behind. So I thought that was a great point. But so now carry on. Yeah.
So that is on the training front for me. And yeah, like you said, I could make it work 3 days a week. I'm fairly advanced. I'm not an elite lifter by any means, but I'm decently advanced at this point. But I could still progress 3 days a week if I had to make it work. And maybe I will have to make it work due to other engagements that I may have on the work front or relationships or whatever. So in terms of diet, I do not track my calories or macros for the vast majority of the year. So when I'm gaining muscle or maintaining, I don't typically maintain. I either lean gain or cut. And of course, I prefer to spend much more time gaining, or that is my aim at least. And if I don't mess things up, then that's what's happening. And I do not track my macros during those times. That said, of course, my diet is very legit, like a lot of veggies, a lot of fruits, very decent food choices for the most part. I manage my food environment well, so I don't keep things in the house that could make me overeat potentially. I know my culprit foods. That is another thing I learned over many years. So peanut butter, nuts, dark chocolate, and things like that. They are a great source of nutrition potentially, but I don't have them around the house because they have been problematic items for me in the past. And I enjoy social events as well, but I do them like an adult, again, with some sense of responsibility. I will have some alcohol, every once in a while. On average, maybe 6 glasses of wine per week, maybe 4 glasses of wine per week on average, So it could be 2 glasses of wine 3 days a week or something like that. It's rare that I drink more than 3 days a week. And that is something, again, that I can enjoy in moderation, and it has no detrimental effects on my progress. And then if I want to get very lean, like I am now, so probably I'm closing in on about 8% body fat, and I just honestly, A, want to see how it looks like, and B, it will be just beneficial for posting content and things like that. I now transitioned into tracking macros, or I should say I tracked my macros once. I put together loose meal plan for myself that I have. I know exactly what I'm going to be eating for every meal, essentially, and I just follow that, and I'm dropping fat at a decent rate. So, but that is like 1% of my year. And before this, I haven't tracked macros for 2 years, and I've managed to bulk, to cut, to maintain, do everything without macro tracking, and that is my nutrition.
Cool. So yeah, you identify some trigger foods, which I think is an important thing to realize for people. If you've got a food that when you come home at the end of the day, you tend to reach for and blow out on, not having them around is a really simple hack to, or habit to be in. If it's in the kitchen, it will get eaten eventually. So just don't have it there. And also interesting, that people, can know that they don't have to religiously track their macros. Because, I track mine fairly frequently. I haven't tracked them for 6 weeks now, but probably before that, I tracked them for 12 weeks straight or whatever. But the thing is, probably the leanest I've ever been, I didn't track macros then. I just ate the same foods and ate slightly less of it and kept eating a little bit less until I was as lean as I wanted to be. So, before MyFitnessPal existed, people got in shape. So we don't have to rely exclusively on those tools. I think that's interesting.
I do the same basically. So at one point, when I got below like 9% body fat, then it just got to the point where my energy levels were lower, my sleep was suffering every once in a while, like just things just started going south. And I was like, you know what? I don't feel very good at this point. And I had a week or two where on the scale, I noticed nothing. On my appearance, I noticed nothing. So if I'm going to be suffering here, then I might as well make sure that it actually works and it's doing its job. So I did backtrack my macros on a couple of days, and indeed they were like decently high, typically higher than what I need or what I needed in the past to get like very lean. So I was like, okay, let's take away a couple of food items here and here. Okay, now it's around this point in terms of calories. This will be good. And I will just follow this meal plan, and like you, I don't count things religiously and I don't put things on the scale. I made changes over time, like, okay, instead of 4 bags of strawberries, I will have 3. Like literally that simple, which sounds very old school and bro-ish, but it is predictable and is doing the job so reliably. So
Yes, that's the thing. People, that reliability is a crucial thing as well, though, I think when it's getting hard and the fat is harder to remove. Because food labels can be out by so much that if you're using a different food group, even though in theory you're in a deficit, you may not be. Whereas at least if you're eating the same stuff, just a smaller quantity, you know for sure that you are eating a lower number of calories. Yeah. And then it also avoids people coming up with the really weird concoctions they have when they get to the end of the day and they're like, I've got 11 grams of protein, 7 grams of fat, and 13 grams of carbs. What can I crowbar into that? And some of the pictures people have sent me of the weird things that they've managed to put together is pretty amusing. Okay, so cool. We're taking up a lot of your valuable time here, so thank you very much for that. Before we move on, we'll have an opportunity for people to find out a little bit more about you. You've given us some great tips on some habits and some keystone habits people can have in place, and mindfulness, and some really interesting insight into your journey and how you go about things, which I think is great. So we want to learn a little bit more about you with a quick fire round. Now you've cheated because you've listened to the Menno Henselman's podcast. So you know the question that's coming up, so you may have prepared for that as well. But
I'll try to forget about them quickly.
Yeah. So first of all, it's the either or. So is it pizza or burger?
I love both, but I think with burgers you can be a bit more creative. Like you can put fries into them, or you can do funky things with cheese. So yeah, I will go with burger.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Chocolate or peanut butter? And I know you're going to say you want both, but
well, let's just put it this way. If I could have one superpower, it might be for my body to treat peanut butter in terms of calories like as if it was water, so I could eat as much of it as possible. So I think that answers it.
You're a peanutter. Okay, beach holiday or city break?
Yeah, for me, city break. We were in Sicily not long ago with my girlfriend, and man, the beach thing just gets so boring to me so fast. It's fun to like lie down and enjoy the sea view a little bit and take a plunge, but it gets really boring really fast for me. So yeah, more so city life.
Okay. So if you're having a steak, rare or well done?
Well done. I'm not a very sophisticated person, so.
You are the first person to give me that answer. Okay. Eggs, scrambled or poached?
Scrambled, because then you can get a bit more creative with the, what you're putting into it and stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Fair point. Actually, not an either or question, but one I meant to ask earlier when you said you love going to the gym. What's the gym you train at? Is it like a bodybuilding type gym? Or just a regular big box commercial gym?
Yeah, it's weird. It's a smaller gym. It's not like an underground basement type gym. It's fairly modern, but it's pretty small. And at first you look at it and you say like, this is kind of crap. But they have basically everything that you need. Like they have even things like Olympic rings and some smart machines that sometimes you don't have in other gyms. So yeah, it's more so bodybuilding type, but fairly gem pop, like the audience that goes there.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, because you love going there. It's not because of necessarily the environment that created at that gym so much. Like I know when we were talking to Valentine, I was talking about Dash Gym and the incredible atmosphere there that would draw you in. This is more an internal, intrinsic motivation to train, as opposed to this environment's incredible.
Oh yeah, it's to be fully honest, this gym is full of assholes. Like I often have to take a deep breath before I go in there. Like, okay, you will be in the gym working out soon. You can make it through. But yeah, if I was working out in a gym like Dust Gym, I've been there. It would be completely different experience.
Yes, yeah, I've heard amazing things about it. Okay, so that question that is supposed to take you by surprise, but you may have been prepared for. Tell me something about you that people probably don't know.
And I actually heard it yesterday in your interview, but for some reason I didn't prepare to ask you what I was.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay, things that people don't know about me. Okay, I'm a huge Manchester United supporter.
Oh, yeah. Good man.
And okay, just for 1 second to stay on the theme of football, I really, really dislike Real Madrid, and even though I'm a Manchester United supporter, I quite like Liverpool as well, because I don't know, they have a likable coach at the moment, and their players are also fairly likable. And I used to like Tottenham Hotspur, but since last year when they beat Ajax in the Champions League, I don't like them anymore.
Okay. So basically, got some partisan football theories going on there. It's interesting. So yeah, not many people like Man U and Liverpool, but I get your point. Jurgen Klopp's like a likable guy.
Yeah.
And he's doing a great job there. Okay, interesting. And why the hatred of Real Madrid? Is it because they buy all the best players from Man U?
Yeah, that's how it started. But honestly, I think these 3 Champions Leagues that they won are like one of the biggest fluke results in football history. Like they had games where it's just almost unbelievable how much luck and referee help and all of those things culminated in their favor. Like the Bayern Munich game 2 years ago, I don't know if you remember that. It also, like 1 year ago when they were playing against Bayern Munich, also crazy amount of luck. Ironically, a Hungarian referee was pretty much knocked Bayern Munich out against them in that game. And also like just in the Liverpool final when the keeper is making the 2 ridiculous mistakes. And then also their players are just not very likable, like Sergio Ramos, like Jesus. It's not a pretty picture.
You're not a Ramos fan there, I think it's safe to say. Yes. Yeah, interesting. I think you're right that 3 Champions Leagues is an incredible achievement, but there did seem to be some helping hands along the way. So there's that. Okay. So after a little football rant there, where can people find out a little bit more about you? And the work that you do?
Yeah, it was great talking to you, and thanks for the question. So we have a website called sustainableselfdevelopment.com, and you can find basically everything that is the central hub for most things. And it is currently down because we are moving to a new platform, but in the meantime, I don't know if my name is going to be in the podcast description, then you just type that name into YouTube and I will come up. And I'm also on Instagram. It's SSD for Sustainable Self-Development. So SSD Abel. And I'm not crazy active there, but sometimes I post something fun in there. So might want to check it out.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, guys, definitely check out Abel's podcast. There's a huge number of guests that I mentioned earlier, which actually means this question is probably, if there's anyone in the world I should ask this, it's you. Who should I interview next?
Ooh, yeah. So have you interviewed Eric Helms already?
No.
Okay, so yeah, definitely get him on. He's a great talking partner. Do you venture out from fitness at all, or is it always about fitness?
So far, it's always been about fitness, but I'm happy to take a suggestion.
Well, okay, so if you like James Clear, I had him on the podcast.
Yeah. Atomic Habits.
Yeah. But he has just a lot of good thoughts about just succeeding in life in general. Like, he's a very thoughtful guy. And then there is also Cal Newport. If you can have him on, he's one of the best podcast guests in general. He has always something unique to say.
Oh, really? I've read 2 of his books, but I've never heard him on a podcast. I'll have to check those out.
Yeah, and then there is Mike Matthews, Muscle for Life. So he is a really good guest about business related things. Like, it's basically listening to an interview with him about business, and specifically fitness business, because that's what he's doing, is like taking a $2,000 course about business or something like that. It's so insightful, and it can also be very motivational. He has a lot of good gems to drop along those lines. And then, the other names are probably those that you have heard before. Greg Nuckols, great podcast guest in general. And he's also one of those guys that you can ask him about some unconventional things. Like, he's a powerlifter, a world record holder. So most people ask him about powerlifting related things, but you can ask him about hypertrophy, also even business stuff, just a lot of things that you wouldn't think he has some thoughts, but he's kind of like Menno in that even when it's some seemingly tangential topic, he will have some deep, well-formulated things that you probably haven't heard from other people. So I would highly recommend him as well. And if I can think of something else, I will drop you over in an email.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you. Yeah, Greg and Menno, I wonder if it's like, have they sat there, thinking their philosophy through on all these different questions they get asked on sort of seemingly random subjects, or is it just that they're incredibly good at formulating their thoughts and articulating them quickly? Because sometimes I've heard them and they seem on this really like this strange tangent, yet they have a very coherent point to make about it. So it's impressive.
Yeah, it's also they're just crazy, ridiculously intelligent.
That helps.
It's and part of intelligence is very good nerve conductivity. Like, you just think faster, and so probably if they have thought of something before and they didn't even think it through that much, they can just tap into that really quickly. But also they are just like spending a lot of their time researching. One name I forgot is Mario Tomic as well. He's a really good guest as well. Okay. Also like kind of personal development / business / fitness, because he's kind of doing all of them, and he has had a very interesting journey and a lot of good stuff to share. So I would also recommend him.
Cool. Okay.
Awesome.
I'll get those guys their emails sent out to them, see if we can get them on. Nice one. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate that. It was great.
Awesome. It was an absolute pleasure. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, then please, once again, consider dropping a 5-star rating on iTunes. It would mean a lot to me, and it would be truly helpful. And if you're interested in more cool stuff, then you could visit my YouTube channel. If you type in Sustainable Self-Development Podcast there, or even SSD Podcast, it will come up. And if you're interested in working together with me, then you can check out the Calendly link in the show description. There you can book a free call with me. We can hop on that call, chat about your goals, challenges, determine if we are a good fit. And if that is the case, then we could be working together going forward to get you to the results that you want. So that's all I had to say for today. I hope you enjoyed this once again. And with that, see you next time.